At this section of the field school today, we have some pulse diseases to talk about. You can see here that we have a field demo with chickpeas and another one with field peas. At the far end, there's a couple of different varieties of faba bean for demonstration. I won't be talking about any faba bean diseases. And I noticed there's some soybeans in here behind you. You may want to have a look at those. And there's some field pea varieties as well. So we're going to be focusing on these two demos here, the chickpeas and the peas. And then after we're finished here, we'll move into the tent and we'll talk about some dry bean diseases. So if you're standing at the front of this plot looking that way, the plot numbers are reversed. So number 1 is here closest to you and number 6 is furthest away. And the reason I want to start here is because if you take a look down at the canopies of these various treatments, can you see any differences? Does some look a little bigger, a little better? Yeah, so if you look at your chart, which look best? The one that's been sprayed with a fungicide. So this is a disease called ascochyta in chickpea. It's very aggressive, and we had some seed that had a high percent infestation, natural infestation. And when you plant chickpea seed that's got ascochyta in it at levels of 2 to 3% or higher, that's what you're going to see in plots. What you see in plots 2 and 3 here is pretty serious disease already at quite an early stage. And if you come into the plots and look, you can see those symptoms of ascochyta on chickpea very clear. You can even see from here that some of the plants are starting to, they're not going to make it. If we came back and looked at these plots in a month, they'd probably be just about all dead. This plot here was healthy seed. So seed that was planted that had either an undetectable, a very low, or no ascochyta in the seed. And you can see the difference that using high quality disease-free seed makes. It gives the crop the ability to get a good start, whereas the naturally infested seed doesn't. So we've got naturally infested untreated. The next one is naturally infested with a seed treatment. And then the last 3 are all naturally infested with a seed treatment. Number 1 has 1 application of Bravo, 2 has 2 applications of Bravo, and 3 is going to have 3 applications, but it doesn't have the 3rd one on it yet. So you're getting to see a snapshot in time of how these foliar fungicides can have an effect on an aggressive disease like ascochyta. So this disease doesn't need a lot of moisture, but the conditions that we've had certainly do favor the disease. So we have really good disease pressure. One of the things I'll mention about ascochyta in chickpea is that you can certainly see the effect that disease-free seed has, but a seed treatment, it's a little more difficult to see the effect of the seed treatment in this demo at this stage. If we'd have looked at these crops maybe a week or 2 ago, you would have seen the effect of the seed treatment. It would have held off the disease a little longer. Because this is a polycyclic disease, it produces rounds of infections and rounds of spores a number of times throughout the growing season. If we didn't apply any fungicides, this disease would eventually work its way into all these plots and create serious yield penalty in all of them. So it's important to manage diseases in pulses like ascochyta and mycosphaerella that we'll talk about in the peas using integrated approaches. So healthy seed treatments, and then if the disease conditions are conducive, apply fungicides at the correct time. Okay, so the second disease we're going to look at is ascochyta or mycosphaerella disease complex in field pea. Most of the symptoms I'm seeing in these plots look like ascochyta, so we don't see a lot of mycosphaerella in these plots, but we can certainly see lots of ascochyta, but it's down low in the canopy at this stage. And so you have to kind of peel back and look down low, and you'll see on the lower leaves lesions that, so yeah, everybody, it's probably good for everybody to come on in and have a look. Just peel back the canopy of the peas there and have a look way down low, and you'll see those ascochyta lesions on the peas.
The black spots?
They're dark brown to tan lesions, and they'll occur way down low in the canopy. Probably be a little easier to find in this plot or sorry, the next plot over, or sorry, yeah, here. This is the infected seed here with no treatment on it. So it may be a little easier to find the symptoms in here, but I've walked through all these plots and seen it everywhere. So the demonstration here is the same as the chickpea. You've got healthy seed, infested seed with no treatment, infested seed with a seed treatment, and then fungicide sprays 1, 2, and 3. This disease, Ascochyta, starts way down low in the canopy, as you'll notice now, and works its way up. At this stage, where the disease is down low in the canopy and really building momentum down there, and as the canopy is getting closed up and creating a nice little microclimate and we have high humidity, these conditions are really ripe for this disease to explode. So I would predict that that third fungicide application, we're probably going to see a benefit there, maybe even a yield benefit. And at this stage, when the disease is building low and getting ready to explode up into the upper canopy, crops like peas really respond well to a treatment. So I'm going to give you guys a chance to kind of walk through these demos and have a look. And then in about 5 minutes, I'll call you into the tent and we'll talk about some bean diseases and answer any questions about the chickpea and pea demos here. So feel free to have a look around and then we'll get started again in the tent in about 5 minutes. Yeah. So we'll talk about dry bean diseases for a couple of minutes here. There's probably 30 or 40,000 acres of dry beans in southern Alberta, and there are a couple of diseases that we'll talk about today. For these pulse diseases, we're really touching on the diseases that are most common and most severe year in and year out. A number of other minor diseases that can kind of pop up here and there, but we're just talking about the major diseases today. So we've covered Ascochyta and chickpea, Mycosphaerella and Ascochyta in field pea, and now we're going to talk about white mold and bacterial blight in dry bean. So for dry bean growers, white mold caused by Sclerotinia sclerotiorum, the same organism that causes stem rot in canola, is probably the biggest disease issue and sometimes the biggest constraint to production. And so we have a couple of potted bean plants here. We tried to get white mold going on them. The reason we didn't put in a field demo for white mold and dry bean is that we knew that it would be too early for that disease. The disease normally shows up later on. It's a late season disease after the canopy closes, usually in late July or August is when we start seeing the disease show up. We did our best in the greenhouse to inoculate some beans. We don't really have anything significant to show you, but we do have some textbooks here that have some photographs of white mold and dry bean for those of you that maybe haven't seen that disease before. We did manage to get some symptoms of bacterial blight on dry bean, and I'll show you those in just a minute here. I wanted to talk about one thing before I turn you loose to look at these demos, and that is for controlling these diseases, it's always best to use more tools to manage diseases than fewer tools. And so we talked about healthy seed treatments, resistant varieties, sometimes even plant architecture. So for example, peas or beans that can stand up a little better, that don't flop down on the ground. That can help you avoid disease as well. So using all of these tools to manage disease will help you on your farm to increase your production and reduce losses to disease. Fungicides are an important component of disease management for the diseases we've talked about today, primarily because there's no complete genetic resistance. So there is some tolerance and there is some plant architecture that helps us to avoid disease, but there's no real complete or true resistance. And so when the disease shows up and the environment is conducive, the only option we have is to apply fungicides. And in order to be successful at that, the timing of fungicide application is critical. And so I managed to round up a few pieces of literature on assessing risk in pulse crops for Ascochyta in chickpea, Ascochyta mycosphaerella in pea, and white mold in dry bean. And there's some handouts on the table here. You can feel free to take them. Unfortunately, I had to kind of take a snapshot out of a PDF, and the quality of the images isn't fantastic. If you want to get more information, I've provided the source, the online source, or the manual that it was taken from. So you can either go online and look for it, or you can contact me and I'll see if I can get you a better copy of it. So the basis of these risk assessor tools is looking at all of the components that add to disease. And when you reach a certain threshold, your risk is high enough that you should consider a spray. And so it goes through things like, let's talk, say, for example, dry beans and white mold. The assessment tool will ask you questions like, when was the last time that a sclerotinia susceptible crop was in rotation? So if you had sunflowers the previous year, your risk is high. If you had cereals the year before, your risk is low. And then it will ask you questions like, what was the weather like at flowering? Was there a lot of leaf wetness and high humidity, or has it been windy and dry? And that will tell you whether your risk is high or low. So it'll go through questions and the long-range forecast. Are they forecasting intermittent showers, or unstable weather, or actual downpours? These are the things that will increase the risk of white mold being a real problem and indicate to you whether or not it's time to put on a fungicide application. So there are 3 handouts that I have there at each section, one for chickpeas, one for peas, and one for dry beans, that have an example of a risk assessor that can help people to make decisions about fungicide application. On the reverse side of that page is some information on the disease and management of the disease. And so there's information on the 3 pulse diseases that we've talked about today. So I'm going to move over here to the table and just show you where to look on these plants and demos to get an idea of what these things look like. So on this pot here, if you look at the lower leaves, you'll see some marginal necrosis or chlorosis and some spotting. And on the lower leaves here, on this tattered leaf, you'll see some common blight, and you'll see necrotic spots and chlorotic halos around. And so these bacterial diseases are very weather dependent and weather driven, and they're controlled mainly by using disease-free seed and bactericidal seed treatments. But there are also bactericidal sprays that can be applied in season to control those diseases as well. Here are the demos for gray mold of bean and white mold of dry bean. Probably not going to be a lot to see there. It's just we weren't able to get it going in the greenhouse. But I do have some plates that have the organism on them. One of these plates shows an apothecia, or the carcinogenic structure that releases ascospores. So if you're curious about that, you can see it there. And then some textbooks. Here is the risk rater for Ascochyta on chickpea. Here's the one for field pea, and here's the white mold. And the last thing I've included is a pulse crop news scouting for disease in pulse crops, which may be of interest. So feel free to look around at the demos, look at the plates, ask questions, look at the textbooks, and take as many copies of the risk assessment tools or the scouting guide.